It was time. There was no other way around it. No more prolonging it. It had to be done. So I sat down and wrote a check out for half of the total amount I was going to be paying them. And so I walked up those stairs, placed the envelope in the mailbox, set to be whisked away to its destination. Now, there's no harm in asking about payment plans, just always being respectful and wanting to best serve the company and how they run things, which is kind of how I worded it. But again, it doesn't hurt to ask. I was given an invoice for the lump sum, and so I asked them if they could or would be willing to do some kind of half up front, half down the road. And they agreed, and they let me do half up front, and then I will pay the rest when all the editing and stuff is completed. Now, I understand that money is a big issue when it comes to the self-publishing route. Believe me, it has held me back for these past 2 years. But my husband and I have worked really hard. We've saved, and we're very frugal, and we have the money. And it is hard for me to send off or spend all this money on a book. Believe me, I have cried several times about spending this much money on myself. But my husband is super sweet and said, you know, I have been writing ever since I was a teenager, and I've been working at this for so long. It's gonna be so cool to say that my wife is a published author, and it's gonna be so cool for you to say that you are a published author. So this needs to happen. And I was just like, thank you. So it kind of goes without being said, but I'm gonna say it anyway, that your manuscript needs to be in its tip-top, pristine condition at this point. I had many rounds of edits and about 4 beta readers. And then I had my mom go through my book with a fine-tooth comb, edit and rework sentences and dialogues and descriptions and grammar and all that good stuff to see what was confusing, what didn't make sense, what wasn't clear. And she came back to me and said, you know, these couple parts are not realistic. They wouldn't have happened. That wouldn't have happened. And I was like, oh, good to know. And so I reworked those little sections and kind of fleshed them out a little bit. Teeny tiny story time. So my mom told me that she had a visceral reaction to a part in my story that was not in my protagonist's character voice. It made my mom extremely upset because it was not accurate to the character. I didn't think anything of it when writing it, but it just goes to show that it's good to have outside opinions. Super helpful. And it helps to know that my parents are not biased towards my writing. And yes, both of my parents have read my story. They are the first people that I will go to read my stories, both of them being avid readers. They're really good about giving me honest, truthful critiques. As an aside, my dad read an old book of mine. He read the first 4 chapters, and he said they were really, really good. So I went ahead and sent him chapters 1 through 17. And then he told me that he goes, it got kind of boring, you know, that mushy middle conundrum, and the story kind of just fell off. So it's nice to know that my parents are really good about giving me honest feedback. But needless to say, I actually agreed with my mom when she pointed it out about my protagonist's character voice, and I went ahead and changed that little part in my story. It was only like 2 sentences of dialogue, so it wasn't that big of a deal. The biggest edits that I cannot recommend enough are filter words and passive voice. Those will elevate your book immensely. It did mine. And I didn't know about those when I first wrote my book, and when I went back, like that was my first draft, and then I went back and did my second and third and whatever, how many drafts, you know, and you go and edit. I was just like, oh my gosh, wow, I have so many filter words. But it was hilarious how there was one sentence in my book that just clicked in my brain what passive and active voice was. And the sentence was something along the lines of, she was sitting on the front porch as the sun was setting in the sky. Obviously, horrible sentence. And it just dawned on me how awful and passive that was. Changing it to, she sat on the porch while the sun set in the sky. It sounds so much better, cleaner, crisper, boom, love it. I write like that now, which is great. So at this time, I was given a questionnaire that asked if any part of my book was used with AI. That meant any images, any writing, anything. And you will be happy to know that I used absolutely nothing from AI with this book. I knew nothing about AI 2 years ago, and I hate that that's the way the world's going. I was also given a author's welcome packet, welcoming me to the company, who I'd be working with, and their contact information. It then broke down the editing services that I will be using and the timelines and deadlines for each one, when the content editor would be done, and then when they'd be moving on to the next editing service, etc. It then explained how I needed to organize my front and back matter and broke down each one and if they were applicable to my manuscript and how to include it in my book. A lot of it wasn't applicable, it's a good word, to me because a lot of it had to do with like if you used quotes, if you were doing facts and stating research and stuff, you needed to have your citations and cite all your sources and all that kind of stuff in the back. It talked about if you're going to have a foreword, a preface, acknowledgements. It was interesting to read through it though, because it explained how to use quotes from copyrighted statements, like poems and quotes from people, and how to attribute them and that sort of thing. I thankfully don't use any quotes or copyrighted statements in my book, so that didn't really pertain to me, but it was kind of interesting to read through. But if you use any poems or song lyrics or scientific research, definitely something to look into and need to make sure that you can legally use those. It then went over paraphrasing and plagiarism. So this was quite a hefty packet. I want to say over 30 pages. I was then given a checklist, which I always love checklists, given me a checklist on how I needed to prepare my manuscript. So I just followed the checklist. They wanted it in Microsoft Word, which I think that's where a lot of people edit and format books in. So if you don't have Microsoft Word, I want to say it's pretty cheap to invest in getting it. And I wrote my book in Google Documents, but I just went ahead and copied and pasted it into Microsoft Word. So I put it in there thinking I would then just send it off. Nope. Upon reviewing my book in Microsoft Word, there were a lot of highlights for grammatical errors that Google Documents didn't pick up on. And so wanting to have a good first impression with the editors, I spent several hours going through my manuscript and looking at each highlight that was a correction and corrected most of them. Some of them were, I want to say like a glitch or wrong. So I didn't touch those. I didn't use every single correction that it recommended. But a lot of it was commas and hyphenated words, which I am not good with either. So that was very educational actually for myself to go through and realize, oh, okay, so that is how where I need to have a comma. Yay, I learned something and will hopefully be implementing it in my future books. Cool, it is now all ready to be sent off, plopped it in an email and sent it off to the editor. Okay, and now it was time for the fun stuff, giving me a break from the sad stuff, aka the money. Now it was time to fill out all the information about my book. And just you wait, I thought this would be fun. Boy, was I about ready to freak myself out. So this section wasn't terrible, it just took me forever. I had already written a blurb from the back of my book, but it was difficult because I had to condense it down to 140 words and I had it at 212. And my brain was just thinking, oh my gosh, how do I condense this? I looked up a few examples on Google, just trying to find how do you write one? What's a good way to write one for my genre? And then I was able to boil it down to 2 different versions. Then I had my husband listen to the 2 different versions, and he gave me some really good input and insights. He helped me out a lot, and we wound up agreeing on the same one and went with that one. Remember when I said in my very first video how it is helpful to have a summary, 1 to 3 sentence summary of your book? This is helpful for right now for something that's called catalog short description. Not fully sure what that is for. I don't know if it's for libraries or what, but that was in there, and so I put it in there. Then I needed a 1-line summary of my book. Whew! Boiling it down to bare bones. Then I had to do a 50-word count bio of myself. Hate talking about myself. Then I had to do a 50+ word count bio of myself. Hate talking about myself even more. All right, so then it went into the cover design and the book's genre. My eyes were hurting at this point, so I took a break and then I came back. And I thought that the cover design was going to be the hard part. Boy, was I wrong. They ask you some simple questions to kind of lure you in to a false sense of security. They asked how your name is going to appear on the book. What is the book's genre? What is the overarching theme? Where does the story take place? When does the story take place? What mood or emotion do you want to invoke from the reader? Then they asked me to link pictures from linked websites that they provided of pictures that inspired the background image, pictures that inspired the characters and the setting of the book. I also at this time included the cover that I had previously designed so that they could have a foundation to work off of. Then came the part that sucked. Before I go any further, I'm going to need to make some tea. That's tea. Tea's a good idea. Tea's a good idea. Okay. I can get through this. So the next thing they wanted me to do was to list 3 Amazon books that had been published within the last 3 years of today's year that were comparable to my book. I had no idea. Another teeny tiny story time. Let me tell you something about myself. I like to read, but I like to write more than I read. I know it's bad. But the books that I do enjoy reading are mostly vintage books. Look at this cute little book. Look at it. It's cute. It's vintagey. Oh. And I like to read books and this is about from like the 40s to 60s, I believe. Let me look. Watch it say it's from the 1990s. That'd be funny. Okay, so it says copyright in 1961. So I am not very familiar with a lot of the stuff that goes on like TikTok or Instagram. A lot of the viral books that are going around, I know nothing about them because I'm lost in vintage world land. And I really don't like writing a lot of stories that have a lot of technology in them. So a lot of my stories take place from either the early 2000s and backwards. I scoured Goodreads, I scoured Facebook and Google and Amazon trying to find a book or books that were the slightest bit comparable to mine that had been published within the last 3 years. I asked my mom and dad, and it was hard for them to think of something. So I guess do have several books in mind that you can have ready, I guess, that are comparable to your book. Don't be like me. Seriously, this was so hard. And I'm sure I was just overthinking the heck out of it, as I usually do. But I was freaking out. And I didn't need to, but I sat there, freaking out, not knowing, thinking that I was failing already. Because some of the books that might have been comparable to mine were ones that had been published from like 4 to 5, 6 years ago. Or the ones that were slightly comparable to mine that were within the 3-year mark had darker themes. They weren't feel good like my story is, and had a bunch of like smooshable content. And my book is clean and wholesome, but not cringy, you know? You know? My book is based on a thought that I had when listening to a specific type of music. It wasn't inspired by any other book. It was music. So I had no idea. It all worked out though. I explained myself and said that, you know, I only read old vintage books, or I mostly read old vintage books. And she again was super nice, and all of my fears and thoughts of being a failure were super unwarranted. So my mom had a gotta fluff the hair, guys. I'm losing my hair. It's really sad. I don't want to talk about it. That better? Yes? I can't see very well. It needs to make me look beautiful. It then broke down the editing services. I have so many clips for such a stupid bit. The camera. Stop. Camera. Stop looking at the camera.